Hello and welcome back to Art Masters with me, Mrs. Portilla. Today we're going to be doing Surreal Landscapes by Rene Magritte. Surreal means dreamlike, not real. So Magritte actually liked to paint realistically, but then he made it surreal or dreamlike by placing objects that really shouldn't be there. And so he liked to trick your mind. He sometimes made objects so big that it even made it more dreamlike or surreal. So today we're going to be doing a surreal landscape with an over large object out of context or out of place, like a big large orange floating in the sky instead of the sun. Or maybe it's a big large apple floating in the sky. And we have a little city landscape. So let's go ahead and get started on our surreal landscape. So to get started on our Magritte surreal landscape, you're going to watch me first, but we're going to start with this cloud colored paper. So you can kind of turn it around and decide which way you want it to be. So we're going to do a nighttime landscape or cityscape. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our black paper and our special landscape paper, and I'm going to place this in the center of my page. And I'm going to turn it over because I'm actually going to use this as a template. And I'm going to pick a light colored pencil, so like a white or a yellow. And I'm going to trace around my page. You want to try to get it as centered as possible so it looks nice. And then you're going to hold down with one hand and trace with the other. So go ahead and get your white or yellow colored pencil and use your template to trace the rectangle in the center of your page. Awesome. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our mountainous landscape. So watch me first. I'm going to take my cloud background and my scissors. If you want to draw a line, you can. If you're more comfortable with that, I'll use like a light yellow. And this is about half of the page, right? So I'm going to go make mountains shapes about half of the page with my pencil. Let me go over that in green so you guys could see a little better. So I'm going to draw a little mountain landscape, and then I'm going to cut that out with my scissors. If you don't want to draw on the back and you just want to freehand, that's totally fine. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to either cut or trace your mountain landscape. Okay, great. So now you have your mountains cut out. I'm going to use the bigger piece of paper because I want more paper. And you see how this one is smaller. I'm going to use the bigger one. And I'm going to place it back in the box that I drew. And you see how now this is creating the look of mountains with sky behind it. So go ahead and glue your cloud landscape, line it up with your template. So then the black part is our mountains. Awesome. So now we're going to add pastel to make our background and our foreground. We're going to end up doing a cityscape with a little bit of water at the bottom and then a couple of buildings. So to start with our water, and if you decide you don't want it to be water and you want it to be grass, that's totally fine. But I'm going to do water. So watch first as I take, this is going to be minimal amount of colors, guys. So I'm going to use the side of my blue pastel. I'm going to practice on my newsprint. And I'm just going to add a hint of water at the bottom. Let's say you wanted to do grass. Maybe you'll use a little bit of the green. I'm not using the tip. I'm using the side. Okay. So if you want, we're going to add a little bit of water with your pastel using the side. And if you have a scratch paper, You can cover the edge here, or you could use your scrap paper that you had from your landscape to kind of mask the bottom of your page. And then you're going to use little tiny circles. We're not getting crazy. We're doing very minimal movements here to just kind of blend in that water. Now, if you want, this part is optional. You can add a little bit of a hint or a color stain, we'll call it, to your sky. Did you hear I said a little bit? We don't want to get crazy. So maybe it's like the sun's just going down. So again, I might take my scrap paper just to mask, and maybe I'll just use the side with a very light color. This is optional, to add just a little bit of yellow to my sky and blend it just a little bit. So I'm just adding a little bit of a stain of color. So if you want to add a little color stain to your sky, you can. That part's optional. You might be happy with the way your sky looks. Remember, we're just doing very little hints here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do our mysterious floating object. So as you know, Magritte had realistic looking drawings and paintings, but they were filled with objects mysteriously out of context. So instead of maybe having a moon in the sky, perhaps it's a giant orange. So we are going to decide what our shape is going to be, but first we're going to make our shape. So watch me first. You're going to grab your black paper, and you should have a template like one of these little cups. So you could make a giant shape. So we're going to have our giant shape. We're going to trace it, and then we're going to cut it. So once you have your shape, we're going to decide what that shape is going to be. So it could be an apple. So do you see how the apple, they cut a little bit of the shape to make it look a little bit more like an apple? Perhaps it's an orange. Maybe it's planet Earth. So you're going to decide, are you going to do a fruit? Are you going to do a planet? And then we'll start to color. So think about what you want to do. And if you do want to do an apple, or you want to adjust your circle shape a little bit, that's fine. I think I'm going to do a giant orange today. So watch how I'm going to color this with my soft pastel. So be thinking about what your shape is going to be. So I'm going to start with kind of a middle color of orange, and I'm going to use the side of my chalk. So go ahead and decide what your object's going to be and color that first layer of color. So if it's going to be earth, maybe you're doing blue across the whole circle. If you're doing an apple, maybe it's a red or a green apple. Okay, great job. So now we have kind of our middle ground, that layer of color onto your fruit or your planet. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add some shading. Magritte had some realistic drawings. So let's go back to our orange. So you see how I have the highlight, the white right there, and where my fingers are, there's some dark. We have our light source, and we have our dark along the edge. So that's what we're going to do to our shapes to make them three-dimensional. So with my orange, I'm going to grab a darker color like red, and if my light source is here, my dark's going to be here. So I'm going to go along the edge with my darker color. See how I don't color the whole thing, just the edge, almost like a happy face. And then I'm going to take my lighter color for a light source. So I'm going to use some yellow, which I'm going to kind of do the same thing, kind of a happy face, but more in the middle. And to really make that pop, I'm even going to add a little bit of white. Do you see how I'm kind of blending them just by doing little circles? Feel free to practice on your newsprint. So now I'm going to do little circles of my white to kind of blend those colors, which is going to make it pop more. And then you're going to use your tissue to just lightly blend. When you blend, some of that color is going to go away, so you really don't want to push hard. And you want to tap that chalk away. So go ahead and add some dark and lightly blend. Okay, awesome job. So you should have your mysterious floating shape, which should now hopefully look like something like a planet. Maybe it's Earth. If you need to add a little bit more detail, like you want a little bit more pop, go ahead and do that before we glue anything down. So you could add a little bit of darker hues. Maybe you need a little bit more highlight. You could see on my apple, I added some white and some yellow. So go ahead, if you feel like you need a little bit more pop, you want to get that going before you glue down. So before we glue it, we want it to look surreal. So honestly, no matter where I put this orange, it's gonna look surreal. So I don't really want mine sitting here because that doesn't look very balanced. We still want our painting to look balanced. So I might put my floating orange about there. Maybe it's a floating apple. Maybe it's sideways. So lay out your drawing and decide where you think your object looks best. Awesome. So once you have your floating mysterious object, an apple, an orange, whatever it is, glued down, we have our background and our foreground, but now we want to kind of make this look like a cityscape. So this is going to be up to you how much detail you want to add. You could be very minimal, or you could add a little bit more depending on how much time you have. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my apple and I'm going to add a stem. So I'm going to go right here and right over into the sky. So that's not a lot of detail, right? Just a little bit on my floating object. Looks more like an apple. And now I'm going to make just some lines on my water. So if I'm going to do my water down here, I might need white or my light pencil. So when we're doing water, the further away something is, you have shorter lines that are closer together, and the closer it is, the longer the line is. So I'm going to take my colored pencil and I'm going to start in the back here. And I'm doing some short lines to make this look like water. And then as I get closer, I'm just going to do a few longer lines. Very minimal, right? I didn't add too much. Maybe I'll add a couple little tips of highlight on some of these lines to add that kind of sparkle look that the water has sometimes. Maybe you're done after you do the water. Or do we want to add a little city on our land? So this is going to be up to you. You could finish, just add a little bit of detail to the water. Maybe you want to just add a little bit of detail to your mountains by just adding a little bit of colored pencil to one side, indicating kind of the shadow. If you want to add a cityscape, we're going to make it very simple and geometric. So rectangle buildings, square, rectangle. We're not doing super detailed. So just watch what I do and you could decide. Awesome. Once you're done with your cityscape, with your mysterious floating object, you are going to put your name on the back and you're going to glue your Magritte sticker on the back. And if you have time at the end of class and you want to look at each other's work and evaluate the objects of our Surreal Landscape by Magritte. So great job today, guys, with your Surreal Landscape by Magritte. If you have time to evaluate and look at each other's work, go ahead and point out some positive things that you like. Maybe you like their composition. Maybe it's really balanced. Maybe you really like the way someone did their detail on their water. Or we could point out the highlights and the darks and the lights of someone's object or their realistic object. So go ahead and evaluate each other's work if you have time with some positive feedback. And we'll see you next time on Art Masters.